Well, let's continue to talk from the Sermon on the Mount. Last week, Jesus told us how kingdom people handle anger. And I just want to, by way of review, how do we as kingdom people handle anger? How do we process it? We value what first? People. We value people first. We put them at the top of our list, and then the second step in the process is that we become a channel through which change takes place. That when we are at odds with someone, we become the channel through which change takes place, so that we're able to see the process begin to turn around. Jesus shows us how to handle the sixth commandment, thou shalt not murder. Sometimes it seems like murder would be an easier solution, huh? Not a good idea. Not a good idea. In our text this morning, Jesus takes up the issue of sexual temptation. I wonder what percentage of the crimes committed across the board fall in these two categories, the category of anger and the category of sexual impropriety. I wonder how many of the crimes that we see and hear about. As a matter of fact, just as we were listening to the news this week, repeated mentionings of sexual attacks that were done, not in Little Turlock of all places. 4 or 5, I think it was, attacks. People walking down the street and being attacked from behind. It's these two areas I thought were interesting for Jesus to begin in, anger and sexual temptation. And as we look at it, it's almost as if those are two of the most predominantly problematic areas of human existence, especially as it relates to us here in the United States. It's even more on target when you look at how our culture today approaches issues of sexuality. 48% cohabitation is done, and this is specifically taken from a woman's perspective. 48% of women move in with their prospective spouse before they get married. 48%. And of them, 40% ultimately go on to marry their partner. Another study says that the percentage of cohabiting couples before marriage is somewhere between 50 and 60%. And what's interesting about this study is that of that 50 and 60%, over 67% of them end in divorce. The issue, and then we add to it the issue of abortion, same-sex marriage, just the way our culture is looking at the whole issue of sexuality. Isn't it interesting that what was started off as a sexual revolution, supposed to free us from all of our inhibitions about sexuality? How many of you remember when that was the conversation? The Summer of Love, 1967, 68. It was all about getting over those issues. And isn't it interesting that we find ourselves where we are today, and it wasn't quite the panacea that we thought it was. Further, when we consider on top of that Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount is talking to us about how to go beyond the righteousness of the Pharisees. Not just obtaining some legalistic approach to it where the text we're going to look at says don't commit adultery. Instead of just looking at that, Jesus is saying that's the bottom line. He said, I want you to go beyond the righteousness of the Pharisees. How do we go beyond the righteousness of the Pharisees in this area? Unless our righteousness exceeds them, Jesus says that we are not moving into the kingdom of God. So how does a kingdom person handle sexual temptation? Turn in your Bibles with me to Matthew chapter 5. And we're going to begin reading at verse 27. Matthew chapter 5, verse 27. You have heard that it was said, "You shall not commit adultery." It's on the screen behind us. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body go into hell. You shall not commit adultery. Well, of course, everyone was clear on the basic issue that Jesus is raising here. Because adultery in its purest form is being sexually involved with someone other than your marriage partner. They understood that, and the Pharisees and the scribes of Jesus' day fully subscribed to that idea. And they were actually banking on the idea that if they did not participate in an adulterous kind of relationship, that they were good as far as the law was concerned, and that they were meeting what the stipulations of the law had made to them. There's even a general understanding of that in our culture today. I was thinking about it as I was preparing, that in spite of our liberated views on sexuality, this idea of not sleeping with somebody else's spouse is something that's generally endorsed. People get pretty upset if someone does that to their spouse. And yet there's also a little bit of winking at this subject. You know what happens when somebody makes a statement to you and then they wink at you? What does that mean? There's more to the story. There's more to the story than that. You're all very tense this morning. Okay? Relax. Okay? Relax. The idea of romance comes into play, or real love comes into play. And what will we do if I feel like I love someone, even though that someone may not be my spouse? And we allow, even though we generally accept the idea of not committing adultery, there's also the opportunity that comes along that someone grabs, even though they're with someone that's not their marriage partner, and they do so because they were in the moment. They do so because they had certain feelings that cropped up, and they justify the behavior that they're involved in an inappropriate sexual relationship. They justify that because of how they feel in the moment. Have you ever talked with someone who justifies their actions in that kind of way? They make it sound like it's okay for them to compromise their marriage relationship because of that. And so while we generally accept the idea of adultery not being appropriate, there are all of these accommodations that we make within our culture today that allow for people to essentially violate their marriage relationship without any kind of consequence to it. Innocent situations are changed in a moment because of some sort of magnetism that takes place between two people. One of the places where, and I know it's only artistic or entertainment, but we see this kind of idea supported in the entertainment industry. Ever been watching a movie and you've got a husband and wife who are having marital difficulties, And all of a sudden, one of the two of them meets someone else who obviously is the right person for them, right? And all of us, have you sat there and felt your emotions get tugged toward this inappropriate relationship? It gets played on us. It gets played on us, and it is our culture of the day, and it's something that we have to be alert to. Jesus says this, "You have heard it said, but I say to you." He comes to clarify what the kingdom position is on this subject. Remember, we're going beyond the righteousness of the Pharisees, right? We're going beyond just a mere legalistic standard of not sleeping with somebody else's spouse. We're talking about what God really had in mind for us when He initially made this statement. Jesus comes to clarify that and make it clear for them. "But I say to you, everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart." Jesus brings us back to the fact that kingdom issues are a matter of what? The heart. Kingdom issues and that doesn't mean that it's okay to break the basic commandment if your heart's in the right place. Okay? But at its very core, kingdom issues are a matter of the heart. They are a matter of what am I committed to in my core as a person. And Jesus brings them back to that. Not just our outer actions, but our internal activity. What is unseen is also important. It's important for us to understand this passage well, since much guilt can be created by misunderstanding it. He begins by saying, anyone who looks at a woman. Can I just say something to you this morning? This is not just a male issue. This is not just a male issue. Now, Jesus is addressing guys. But this is not just a male issue. It goes much beyond that. Even though men are the primary offenders in this area, I did a little research. Female pornography and addiction to it by women is on the rise. Some of the statistics are pretty amazing. It's primarily due to the fact that so much pornography is available online, and it's the same kind of ease of access that it is for men. Jesus takes us back beyond the threshold of just physical activity to the arena of our thoughts. But what is He saying to us? What is it that He's getting at as we talk about this morning? What kind of look? When Jesus says, don't look, what kind of look does Jesus mean? And what is He saying to us? It's important because we're drawn to one another visually, aren't we? My wife did not choose to marry me because I was the ugliest guy in the church. I'm hoping not. I'm hoping that's not the reason she chose me. Somebody help the poor boy. Help me. He'll never get married if somebody doesn't take on this challenge. We choose folks that we enter into relationship, especially a potential marriage relationship. We choose them, at least in part because of the visual appearance that they have. We have the hot girl or the hot guy, right? Or we have the handsome, sophisticated, more mature person that is our point of attraction. There is a part of the selection process that involves the visual perception of the one who's being selected. So when does that look cross the line from being just looking to lusting? When does it cross the line from being, oh wow, she's nice looking, or he's really handsome. When does it cross the line and become a lustful action on our part? We've all felt the tingle of attraction, haven't we? Oh, loosen up, people. We have all felt the tingle of attraction, haven't we? Somebody, and your heart kind of goes, bloop, right? Okay? We've all felt that. So have we now lusted? Have we crossed a line at that point? We all know to each beautiful or handsome person that I become aware of, does that mean that I've crossed a line? At what point am I simply recognizing the beauty of what God has created and what God has brought into being? We've all seen the ogling stairs as a beautiful person walks through the room and attention is drawn to that person simply by the beauty of that person's God-given gift. And we've seen people who cross the line. We see people who just by their look take things to a place that is beyond what Jesus is talking to us and fits into the definition of what he has suggested. Jesus uses a very clear statement here to describe what type of looking crosses the line. He who looks with lustful intent. He who looks with lustful intent. One commentator said, he who desires with desire. He who desires with desire. It's the person who looks at another and doesn't just look and appreciate the beauty, but takes the look and appreciates the beauty and says, I wonder what it would be like if we were together. You see, all of us are aware of the attractive qualities that come as we see folks that are of the opposite sex. We're all aware of that. And we all look at that, and of course when we're younger and we're looking for a mate, there's always that possibility that this person may be someone we'd pursue a relationship with. We know what that's like. That's not what Jesus is talking about. Jesus is talking about the person who ponders the reality of what it will be like to be sexually involved, and the only thing that's really left undone is the actual act itself. There is a running through of the mind of all of the steps and all the process. That is intent. That is lustful intent. And Jesus says that when we go down that path, then it's the same thing as having committed adultery. It's the very same thing. This is where the where the righteousness of the Pharisees is exceeded. Their contention was that as long as no physical act occurred, there was no adultery. And Jesus takes it to a completely different level. And then he elaborates on it, as we're going to see in just a minute. I want to say just a couple of things here, though, before we move on to that. And that's this idea of the intentional or the willful. Because there have been some who have made it almost seem like to even recognize the beauty in another person has been to violate what Jesus is talking about. And it's almost as if you can't really even recognize the beauty in a member of the opposite sex because you don't want to inadvertently sin in that. And I want to be clear with you this morning that that's not what Jesus is talking about. Jesus is talking about the person who intentionally goes out of his or her way to make someone else an object of his or her sexual interest, to use in the privacy of his or her own mind for their own pleasure and for their own enjoyment. And Jesus says that is just like adultery. It's the same thing. And folks, we have so much access to so much stuff online that makes it easy for you and I to go into our private little places and look at the private little things that we might find some kind of personal pleasure in and think that it's victimless, and think that somehow it isn't really the same as the physical act. And I want you to hear this morning, Jesus says that it's exactly the same. It's exactly the same. And we have to recognize that. So then the question becomes, is how do we deal with it? Because it's a matter of the heart, right? And so we don't want to fall into the same trap that the Pharisees and the scribes fell into and just make it a legalistic kind of a thing. So I don't go online and I don't observe pornography online and just because I haven't done an act. And Jesus says, no, guys, it's the heart. It's the heart. As a matter of fact, there are probably things that you and I could watch just on network TV that don't come anywhere close to what pornography might exhibit for us, that are things that we need to stay away from because it simply is an unhealthy thing for us to look at. Because it will affect us where? In the heart. It affects our families when our kids walk through the room and they see us watching what we watch on TV, or our grandkids see us watching what we watch on TV. Because it is a matter of the heart. We have to be careful about the things that we open ourselves up to. Let's finish what Jesus has to say here. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out. When I read that the first time, I heard somebody go, ooh. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it's better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body go into hell. Admittedly, this is a difficult passage. We need to recognize that from the very outset, because it sounds as if Jesus is calling for self-mutilation. But let me just ask you a question. Is the eye the problem? The eye isn't the problem, is it? Or the hand. The eye doesn't act independently from the person. The hand doesn't act independently from the person. But that's characteristically how the Pharisees would have dealt with the issue. They would have made it just that kind of thing. It's how they practiced the law. Jesus responded in another place where a similar issue was being discussed. Listen to what he says. But what comes out of the mouth proceeds from the heart, and this defiles a person. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false witness, and slander. Where do they come from? From the heart. And I thought it was so interesting that Jesus includes this idea of adultery and sexual immorality as something that has its beginning place in the heart. That it isn't just about passion. That it isn't just about the romantic moment. But it's about something that lies at the heart of who we are. And so in this statement, Jesus, that we're looking at here, in this statement, Jesus is calling us to go beyond the righteousness of the Pharisees. When he says, pluck your eye out, cut your hand off, what he's challenging us to do is go beyond the righteousness of the Pharisees. Let's assume for just a minute, for argument's sake, that we were able to take this extreme position of removing an eye or removing a hand or an arm or a foot or whatever. It really would be immaterial. Removing the eye would not change my heart. Removing my hand would not change my heart. One commentator suggested that even removing every part of our anatomy that might possibly sin would only result in our mutilation. And we would be just as sinful after having done all of that as if we had never done it. Isn't that a powerful thing to consider? Some have taken this on in a little different way. Some have tried removing themselves from society so that they never see temptation again. Men living with men. Never seeing a woman. Not allowing a woman to come into their presence. Well, what's the problem with that? The woman isn't the problem. The problem is the man. The problem is what? The problem is with us. What goes on in our hearts? And it's interesting that even in that kind of situation, even where the gender of all the people present is the same, sexual impropriety occurs. It's remarkable. The good news of the kingdom is that sin's power has been broken. That is what Jesus wants us to see. It's that you and I have been set free where? At the very core of who we are. And what he's wanting us to see is the way for us to release the kingdom life that's within us, that has been placed within us by virtue of our relationship with Jesus, when we were made spiritually alive. Everything that you and I need to overcome these kinds of things was placed within us. And the question is, do we try to live out the rules of the kingdom and think by that we will get the life of the kingdom? Or do we allow God to change our heart about how we view all the things that are out in front of us? And see, that's what Jesus is talking to us about. He said, don't get caught up in just trying to not commit adultery. He says, let the change that I want to do in your heart so that you don't even desire the inappropriate expression of your sexuality anymore. Let me begin to change you in such a way that your desires and your attitudes are changed. It's the same kind of concept that we were talking about last week as it relates to anger. How do we deal with one another? How do we address one another in the inevitable differences of opinion that we're going to have? We allow God to change our hearts in terms of how we respond. And the same thing is true as it relates to our sexuality and the bombarding that we receive all the time. There are, I won't name the company, but there's a particular company that when their food ads come on, we just switch the channel. We just switch the channel. Because it is, not because we're afraid of it, but because I don't want to look at that. You see, that's the kind of change that God is wanting to make in us, so that our desires are absolutely in alignment with His desires. And the things that we long for are the things that He has, that are part of His kingdom and that He desires as well. That's the change that we're talking about here. Sometimes what we try to do is, okay, I'm not supposed to have bad thoughts. Okay, I'm going to think really hard now and I'm not going to have any more bad thoughts. How many of you know that that's a recipe for frustration and failure? It does not work. But for us to come, you remember the thought that, or the prayer that David prayed? And it's appropriate for us to finish this way this morning. Lord, purify my heart. Lord, examine me and see if there's any impure way in me. Search my heart. That's how you begin. Search my heart, oh God. Try me and see. You see, that is our place, folks, of relationship with God, so that there is a continual work of the Spirit and our awakening and our alerting to the things that are consistent with God's kingdom that we want to participate in, and not allow ourselves to go down a road that culture around us wants us to go into. It's very easy for us to get drawn into it. And you say, well, how can that be, Pastor? I was talking with the men Saturday morning, and in Matthew 24, Jesus is talking to His disciples, and they're asking Him, what about the end of the age, and when are you going to return, and what are all the details of that? And Jesus said something that I never considered this way before. He said, because of the increase of lawlessness, the love of many will wax cold. Because of the increase of lawlessness. Folks, we are living in a time when you and I are being told that things that historically have been inappropriate are now okay. It's okay. For instance, it's okay for us to have an open relationship, an open marriage relationship. It's okay for a lot of things. And what Jesus is saying is, when you and I are told over and over and over and over again that something is okay, if we are not aware of it and recognizing it for what it is over the course of time, we start to believe that it's true. We start to believe that it is okay. And it's nowhere more evident than in what we're seeing going on in our world around us in relationship to sexual issues. We are being told over and over and over again that the values and the mores that God's Word declares to us are no longer really relevant. And Jesus says it is a matter of the heart. It is a matter of the heart. So when we deal with this issue of looking or touching or however that takes expression in our lives, what we allow Him to do is to create in us a sensitivity of heart that says, God, as a matter of fact, I won't go down that path. As a matter of fact, what we say is, God, I want you to let my desires become your desires, so that I only desire the things that please you. And as we work each day in our lives of being sensitive to that, then God forms us and shapes us and makes us into be His very own. Would you pray with me?